coming up short, fucking with Too Short. Too Short.
What's up? So today I want to go over the main differences between competition maxes and training maxes, what the differences of those are, what they are, the differences are between trained and untrained athletes, as well as how you can take advantage of training maxes as well as competition maxes in your training and your programming. So let's first go over what the differences are between a competition max and between your training max. Just so you know, a lot of the information in the slides you're going to be seeing on the side, I got most of the information from Super Training. I'm currently going through that for the first time, surprisingly, but I've been looking for it for a while and I finally found it, and yeah, so I want to share some of what I'm learning with you. And I've gone through competition and training maxes previously, but wanted to kind of delve more into the science of it and find what I could find and see if I could find anything helpful. So without further ado, let's go over what the competition max is. So the competition max is basically the heaviest load one can handle in a competitive and highly motivated environment. So obviously, if you go to a competition and you're warming up, I'm going to use powerlifting as an example. You're warming up for your squats, it's going to be a lot different than if you're, had a rec center or at a community center or your gym just warming up for squats. You're going to be, obviously you're going to be highly competitive, hopefully. You're going to be trying to win. And you're going to be trying to do the best lift that you can possibly do and set a PR, etc. So you're going to be highly motivated, and that's going to be a lot different than the training max. The training max is the heaviest load one can lift without substantial emotional excitement. So what that means obviously is, you go in, you're not feeling like you have to rev yourself up as hard as you possibly can just to make an easy lift, and that it's a lift that you can basically make, maybe not necessarily every day of the week, but a lift that you can make, and you're not going to go up to the bar kind of worried that you're not going to make the lift, which is what happens quite often in competition because you're going for a personal record. So what is an easy way to figure out whether or not you are going to do a competition max or a training max? One of the easier ways that they outline in Super Training is simply a significant rise in your heart rate. So it's just kind of hard to say, it's kind of hard to understand that feeling if you haven't competed before, but I mean, for me, even taking my first squat attempts, my heart rate rises dramatically. And this is with a weight that, is nothing. I could probably do it for 4 or 5 reps in my training. But yeah, my heart rate still goes up. So, with different levels of training and different amount of competitive experiences, obviously the heart rate thing's going to change. But generally speaking, your training max, when you go in there, you might have a slight elevation in heart rate, but it shouldn't be significant. You shouldn't be able to really feel too much of a difference. Whereas in competitions, I can feel my heart thumping like crazy, like it's going to come out of my chest at some lifts. Some lifts not so much, but that's a really, really good gauge that you can use for telling the difference between a competition max and your training max. So now I want to go over some of the numbers or some of the differences in strength that people can exhibit when they are able to basically take all the locks off them and go as hard as they possibly can. So in Super Training, they mention that that untrained people can basically increase their strength output by up to 35%, whereas trained athletes can only increase that output by 10%. What exactly are the reasons for these big differences? And also, I wanted to go over because I find it interesting that they used involuntary or hypnotic conditions. So I'm assuming that they might have taken some sort of data from, I couldn't find the exact study they used for this, so I don't really know, but maybe they took data from, moms lifting cars off their kids, or they might have used literally hypnosis, because I think this is probably Russian research and they did some crazy shit back then. So they might have done stuff like actually putting people in hypnosis. They might have done things with electrical stimulation. It's kind of hard to tell, but anyways, let's go on to why the differences are so high between untrained and trained athletes. So I would say that the main difference is obviously that a trained athlete trains specifically to lift heavy weights. Their differences between their competition and I guess training max, although this doesn't necessarily specify what the differences are, but basically someone who competes for strength training, you're not gonna just go into a competition and have a 35% raise in your strength. That would be absolutely awesome. I wish I could do that. So a 10% range is definitely feasible. Whereas someone who's untrained, they might not do any kind of training whatsoever. They might not even have stepped in a weight room, and then something might happen where it's like a life or death situation, and they might have to, I don't know, push a rock off their chest, and maybe the rock weighs 200 or 300 pounds, and they're able to do that without any type of training. So I think that's where the main differences are coming from. So basically, I mean, that when you go into a competition, you're going to be revved up and ready to go. So you should be able to expect an increase in strength, but it can depend on certain things like, what lifts you're good at, how fatigued you get from one lift to another. So now let's go into the main differences between competition and training maxes for trained athletes. So let's go over the main differences between competition max and training max in trained subjects. So they were able to find a main difference of approximately 12.5 plus or minus 2.5% in experienced lifters, with a larger difference being shown in larger lifters. So obviously what that means is that generally speaking, when you compete and you're an experienced lifter, you can expect approximately 10% increase in your max. And obviously that can vary depending on what kind of training program you're doing, etc. The thing that I found interesting was that the larger lifters had a larger difference, but when you really give that some thought, it makes sense. The larger lifters are usually lifting the most amount of weight. And generally speaking, when you lift larger amounts of weight, you want to have a bigger difference between your competition and training maxes. You want to leave a lot of your heavy lifts on the platform rather than the gym. So if you have someone who's squatting 1,000 pounds versus someone who's squatting 500 pounds, take 10% of that. That's going to be 900 pounds versus about 450 pounds. So obviously in your training, using a max or using a max of 450 pounds is going to be a lot less taxing than using a max of 900 pounds. So that's why generally the bigger lifters, who are generally stronger in terms of absolute strength, will probably have a bigger differentiation between their training max and their competition max. So now let's go over the difference between your C max and your T max in terms of programming. So Verkhoshansky and Sif say that intensity is often defined as obviously the percentage of one rep max that you use. Most of you already know that, but that your competition max will generally be reasonably stable for a prolonged period of time, whereas your training max can vary from session to session and isn't necessarily the most accurate and stable number to use when programming. So what exactly does this mean? What numbers should you be using for different programs? So for me, I haven't used a lot of very popular programs out there at all in my training career, and I don't use them on my clients. So things like Mad Cow and Strong Lifts and Bill Starr's 5x5, I've never actually used those. I've used some sort of linear periodization using somewhere around 5 repetitions, but I'm not going to really use that in terms of using a 1RM. So yeah, I haven't used those programs, so I'm not going to go over using the percentages for that, but programs that I'm very familiar with and have a lot of confidence in coaching and helping people with is stuff like 531, linear periodization, and RTS. Those three, probably my favorite programs. They work for a variety of strength levels. And for 531, I did a video a while ago called programming with lower weights in order to get stronger. So that was kind of inspired by 531. So a lot of people, when they go into start using 531 training, they use just simply too high of a max for their training percentages. So this is why he says in his book multiple times that you should take at least 10% off of what your actual max is. And if you're competing, you can probably use 10% of your training max, or sorry, 10% of your competition max. If you don't compete, just use whatever your max from your gym lifts are. If you are going to start 531 for your very, very first time, you could probably be even a little bit more conservative and actually take 15% off. So the reason for this being is that you want to keep the cycles going as long as possible for you plateau. And basically when you lower your program max, that allows you to get more reps based on the 531 program because you're doing AMRAP sets. I think my longest cycle without ever not plateauing was around 8 cycles of 531, and I made very, very good gains at that point. So up next comes linear periodization, and this can kind of depend on what part of the year you're in. Are you in an off season, or are you in a peaking phase, or in season getting ready for a peaking phase? If you're in the off season, generally speaking, you can probably still just stick with your competition max. Depends on how hard you really want to go or what program you're really running. Usually people like to take a little bit of a break from competitions after and allow their bodies to recuperate and recover. For that purpose alone, you might just want to stick with using a training max for your programming, just because you basically allow yourself a longer period of recovery and can get some good volume in that way. That's kind of an individualized thing. For things like peaking for meets though, and for in-season training for linear periodization, using a competition max is probably the way to go. Well, of course it's the way to go, because when you compete you want to break your old PRs. So that's why you might do one meet and then maybe 3 months down the road have another meet, and so that whole 3 months time you're running maybe a 10-week linear periodization that results in a new 1 rep max being hit at your meet. Or depending on what kind of linear periodization you're running, maybe you'll run a scheme that allows you to hit a new 3 rep max maybe 2 weeks out from the meet, and then gives you a good time to deload or whatever. There's tons of different ways to do linear periodization, but generally you see for linear periodization, depending on if you're going into a meet or not, you should be using a competition max. With the linear periodization, again, also if you are starting with quite a low percentage to start off with, that gives you a really, really good time to kind of work up volume. And once you actually do get up to the heavier weights, you're not going to really burn out because you have been using a lower percentage of your 1 rep max for quite a long time. So you can generally be pretty aggressive on linear periodizations and use those competition maxes or whatever. And then when it comes to the reactive training system, doesn't matter at all, because you don't use true 1 rep maxes. What Mike Teixeira has talked about though quite often in his videos and articles and in the RTS manual is that going for an RPE of 10 doesn't necessarily mean that you're going for a competition max. He kind of tries to make sure that people understand that. So when in training for him, obviously it depends. Maybe your protocol might call for you to go for 1 rep max, and maybe it might go for you to go for an RPE 10. So he stated that that's not the exact same thing. So an RPE 10 for him, as far as I've interpreted it, is that you are to go in, and in terms of your training max, you're supposed to go in there and perform a set as hard as you can without, obviously we were using the heart rate reference, so without having a super large spike in your heart rate. So a max, like an RPE 10 in training versus an RPE 10 in competition, will still have that difference. So what that difference is, maybe it'll be 12.5% like Sif and Verkhoshansky say in super training, or might be less, might be more for you, depends on your training experience, etc. So that's just something to keep in mind if you are running reactive training type. Just because you have an RPE 10 doesn't necessarily mean you need to work up to an absolute like 1 rep max, 2 rep max, 3 rep max, 5 rep max, whatever. Just means that on that particular day you work up to a rep that you don't think you could do another very easily. That simple. So that basically sums up what I wanted to talk about with using your competition versus training maxes and programming. And I hope you liked the video. And if you have any questions, obviously feel free to comment. Please like the video, really helpful for me. And if you haven't subscribed to me already and like listening to me babble on about strength related things, hit the subscribe button. I look forward to talking to you again soon. Peace.